Yes.
I get the little thing saying I should do it and monetize it, but that would be exceedingly immoral.
Wouldn't it?
I wouldn't say exceedingly.
Like,
To monetize for public education,
well, if other people and other teachers watch your videos, then they're stealing your content. And
look
they're-
who's doing it. Valid point. We could justify theft in any way. Okay, so yesterday I talked about the age of Jefferson in class and mentioned Sally Hemings and lots of stuff, didn't we? So did we finish right here? From yesterday's class, that look about right? Oh, everybody watching, there are people watching, please let me know if the sound is okay. Same deal. And the screen is going fast. So I filmed. And so did it sound okay yesterday? And most of you turned it in. I've not had a chance to grade those, but I've graded the quizzes. If there's something wrong with your score and it doesn't come through, please let me know. Because it's syncing weird. Sometimes for a few people it did not record your short essay. And I'll have to go with that. It won't be hard for me. Most of them did really well on it. Those are good essays, good job. So the test, I can just do it all 50 or 60 short essays.
Yeah.
I can tell from your eyes, some of you are like, that sounds great.
What, like 20 minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes. Come on, let's not get ridiculous.
I mean, 10 a minute.
So, my gift. What did I do with it? We're going to start writing. We're going to write it. We're going to have an essay test next week, and I hope this is repetitive. But there are certain things, and this is the way life is, everybody. Certain things about writing an essay that you have to do for me that might be different than other classes. You know that. That's just the way life is. So I made this essay writing tip sheet because I care about you as humans. Hit the play. Well done.
Is there have to write a Q or a DBQ?
I hate the Q's.
Is it going to be an LE?
No documents.
Okay.
So they call it what, an FRQ or something? A long essay?
You have to write it.
Show? No. Make a play! I would
I'm not a wide receiver, man. Teachers. I'm a line.
You can sometimes catch it.
That's pretty good.
So this is a regular basic you want two? 5-paragraph essay. Please go over this on your own, and I'll talk more about it in class next week. But I lay out the certain things I want, and please read on how I want thesis statements. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've come up with basic formula that's worked very well for students in my class. And last year was kind of an aberration. For those of you who took an AP exam last year, you know what I'm talking about, where it was one essay, up or down. That's your grade. This year, I'm pretty sure it will not. It'll be more like a regular AP exam where you have a couple different essay questions. Yeah, so
It's in person, right?
well, supposedly we'll see what things are going to be like.
Yeah, of course.
But hopefully it won't be one essay up or down. Because I hate that. 45 minutes to write one essay, and if you screw up in your first 5 minutes, well, you know. Yeah, I mean, I don't like that. And I don't teach to the test, but I do things that help you take the exam, which I think is the way you should teach this. But please read through this. It is the thing that I have given, I've tinkered with it over the years, but I've given to write an exam. And so look at this on your own, a couple little hints. And then on the back, that is the rubric. And by the way, don't we all hate the word rubric? Who likes the word rubric? Does anybody like the word rubric?
I'm in part of it.
Rubric. Okay, so this is the rubric that the AP exam uses. And by the way, don't read too much into rubrics. So they go, oh, I got to. If you write a good essay, they'll figure out a way to give you a good grade. So don't worry about it too much. There's just certain things you think, okay, I know that they're looking for. Let's make sure I don't forget them. But the big thing is write a well thought out, analyzed essay with a lot of analysis and organization. But the thesis is technically 2/6 of your essay grade. So 30% of your grade is your thesis statements. And that's one thing I do really emphasize. We'll talk more about that as we go on. But don't forget the other thing. The reason I do those short essays, short IDs, is because that is basically the body paragraph of an essay. And remember what I told you, you have to explain, for the short ID, explain what the topic is, what, where, when, you know, that basic element, which all of you did very well on. Give an example, and then explain why it's important. And a short ID, you explain why it's important by what it led to, correct? Well, why it's important in an essay is you relate it back to your thesis. That's the only real difference. Does that make sense? For those who did, that's all an essay is. We get the other elements in there, and it's basic. And then we'll do another essay a little bit down the road called the document-based question. A little more work, but we add documents into that mix. That's all it is. Just short ID. Not basic element. Yeah.
So this will be the last grade of the quarter, much?
Everything works out now. Or we'll probably have a couple of like little quizzes. But, and it'll be an essay testing class. Probably like, I'll give you a couple choices for essay questions. I'll talk more about it. Please read for this. Since we only have 45 minutes, it'll probably be I'll do it Thursday. At least I want to be here with part of the class, you know, do the best I can on that.
Do you want us to finish in the 45 minutes, or
Yeah.
are we gonna have?
So I'll make it a little bit shorter essay. So like, you know, you think in terms of like around like a 5-paragraph essay, we do a 4. A little bit shorter. I'll tell you what exactly what I want. And it will not be that big, trust me. It'll be fine. So with that, let's go ahead then and take out your notes. We're talking about Jefferson's pragmatism. North Carolina. So Jefferson, first off, what kind of country did Jefferson foresee the nation's going to be? What kind of industry? Most people will be doing what activity?
It's mostly
Yeah, agrarian, farmers, common man. And common man, when I say common man, I don't mean average. What we mean here is of common birth. That means that everybody would have a chance, at least technically. He was also frugal, so he's fearful about spending. And when I talk about the West, remember that element of the West? And I should have had a map there in that photo, but this is one, if I was doing it in the class, I'd just walk over to the map. This area here was all federal land, except for, okay, Kentucky and Tennessee have become states. But the thought was this would be open up to small farmers. And so the United States is going to physically remove, that's his plan, the American Indians who live here and force them here. That's why he is obsessed with purchasing the claim here. Force them to move here, so then someday they will be civilized. Now, 2 things about this. First off, he never realized how dry this area was. That's still, so he was thinking, oh, they'll just move into land just like the land they left. But the other big thing is that they sincerely believe if we don't move them, the U.S. will kill them and take their land. So they saw it as humanitarian, which I think is one hell of a stretch. You see what I mean by that? Yeah. But that's what they were thinking. So, and remember he's a plantation owner. Oh, I love this picture of the Choctaws. I showed this. They put kind of a weird briefs on him, too, for, you know, this is a Victorian era. I just think that's pretty funny. Okay, but here's the last and most important element of Jefferson. Oh, forgot to review. In 1800, Jefferson defeated whom for president? Who was the sitting president?
Adams.
Yeah, John Adams. But remember, each elector had 2 votes. They thought they had 2 votes. Or they thought. They had 2 votes. Who got second place?
Adams. Wait, Jefferson the first time.
There was no second place. Remember, there was a tie for first with Burr. And therefore, it went to the House of Representatives, Aaron Burr. And Burr, who threw their support in the House to Jefferson, even though he hated Jefferson? Hamilton. And the beginning of the, well, they already hated each other. They were rivals.
The culmination.
It's coming in 4 years, they'll culminate very quickly on a little island. Actually, not very quickly, it'll take a day and a half. It was not quick at all. But, so Burr, and then what was the other big thing? That wasn't the only thing. Northerners, in this context, Federalists, but Northerners were furious because of the Three-Fifths Compromise. And what did they call the Three-Fifths Compromise?
Slave.
Yeah, that's slave power. And it wasn't that the slaves had power, it was the power of the slaves and the Three-Fifths Compromise that gave more representation per slave owner. And Northerners called Jefferson, what president? Do you remember that term? And I showed you this very awkward picture from 1803. Oh, remember I told you don't marry cousins? You weren't ready for that picture, were you? I told you about how they, the paintings, the Negro president. And this is that weird philosophic cock that is a rooster herding slaves. That Jefferson got his power because that he was a slave holder. This was a big issue. Oh, who was the slave that Jefferson had many children with?
Sally Phelps.
Yeah, and that's going to become a big issue in the next election. There's a movie, made-for-TV movie, just about a decade ago, about the forbidden love affair of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson.
Did that show on the American History Channel?
Did they show it on that?
I think they might have.
Oh, jeez. It was not a forbidden love affair. What was it?
Rape.
It was rape. He raped his slaves. But, see, Jefferson is the complexity of America, isn't it? There's good and bad elements. So we go through this. Let's get to the last big element of Jefferson's philosophy. And this is the one that kind of throws everything out. It's pragmatism. Being pragmatic is being practical. We got that practical. Now, it's more complex than that. Jefferson said a lot of things. He said he was opposed to a strong central government. And yet when the time was as president, he expanded the power of the central government. To Jefferson's point of view, he was not going to be tied down to previous statements. If a problem comes up, he's going to come up with the best solution for that problem. And so even if he said something totally opposite, he might go someplace else. Now that is a sign of a thoughtful man. But his opponents might also call him a what? Yeah, hypocrite or what? A liar. Yeah, and then what defines what's best for the moment? Is it best for the country or best for him?
It's a coin toss.
And they could be intertwined. And so, with that, let me give you 3 examples of Jefferson's pragmatism. The best example is the Louisiana Purchase. They're signing the treaty. Jefferson said, the United States must strictly follow the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the United States can buy land. But when the chance to buy Louisiana, that massive hunk of land in orange over there on the map on the left, the chance to buy the land claim, Jefferson jumped on it and stretched the Constitution. That's what we call pragmatic. Next. Pirates in the Mediterranean demanded a bribe to stop piracy and taking merchant ships, U.S. merchant ships. The U.S. went into an undeclared war on the coast of North Africa. I'll go into details about this in a second. There was no declaration of war. Remember, Jefferson was furious about the quasi-war with France. What were the laws? I gave you 3 laws, but only 2 names for them. The laws that were passed by the Federalists to shut Republicans up and make it more difficult to allow them to become citizens. Do you remember the name of those laws? 1798. 3 laws from yesterday. So long ago yesterday, those heady days of Wednesday. I was talking in class, I'm looking out the window, I'm at home, and tree cutters were going by, people were walking by with every kind of dog. There's one woman had this dog, I swear to you, the dog was this tall. She could have rode the dog, and she had like a little tiny, like a Shih Tzu with her too. It was hilarious. Yes.
Alien
And the Alien and Sedition Act. The Alien and Sedition Act. banned criticism of the government. And this is what totalitarian states do. By the way, don't you let that little slice of my life. Looking at dogs. And then the Pine Siscons came. It was a good story. Okay, with that, lastly, here's one that's more personal, but also on a national level. Slavery. Jefferson knew slavery was not only immoral, but it could destroy the country. Yet he also knew how much people in this country relied upon working to death human beings. And he also liked his fine life. He liked his mansion. He liked his wines. He liked his library and didn't want to give it up. And that's a pragmatic decision. Slavery is horrible, will destroy the country. I like my fine wine. What did he decide on? Keep slavery. Pragmatism is a complex thing. Most people are pragmatic in some way. People are rarely ideological, always stuck to their beliefs. Most presidents have been pragmatic. The most successful ones have been pragmatic. Some unsuccessful ones too. The best example of a pragmatic president, Washington was pretty pragmatic. Abraham Lincoln, incredibly pragmatic. Franklin Roosevelt, pragmatic. Teddy Roosevelt was pragmatic, without a doubt. Lyndon Johnson was pragmatic, for good and bad. Barack Obama was intensely pragmatic. Trump is pragmatic sometimes. It's a little more complex. Ronald Reagan, for example, was not very pragmatic. What did you say? FDR was so pragmatic. I mean, he had a certain point of view. I always believe in this. But you can imagine what his opponents called him. Hypocrite. And that's where we get, remember, I'm going to emphasize a lot. There are things that are going to be basically with conservative roots and liberal roots, and we'll see him going back and forth, people. But that's why you want to avoid labels. Or look for purity in labels, because you will be sadly disappointed. Or start the tear. Moving on. So that's Jefferson's philosophy. The most important thing to put a star by it is pragmatism. Pragmatism is the most. Everything comes back to that, well, I believe this, but. And so with that, the Midnight Justice. Sound is good, I'm getting thumbs up. All right. So right before Adams left office, so this is in his philosophy. Right before Adams left office, the Federalist Congress that was voted out, but the new Congress won't be seated to the next fall. I know that's weird. They're elected in 1800. Back then they wouldn't be seated until 1801 in the fall. The president wouldn't be inaugurated until March of 1801. Now it's January. Well, the Federalists created a bunch of new federal courts. So Adams then could appoint judges, and they appointed judges as fast as they could. And the Federalist Senate quickly confirmed them, and so now you have all these new Federalist judges. The most important of these judges, Adams appointed a new Chief Justice, John Adams. Did I say John Adams? He appointed himself. No, John Marshall. I wonder if you could appoint yourself. I mean, I guess you could, but you'd have to be confirmed by the Senate. I don't want to leave D.C. I'm going to confirm myself as Chief Justice. William Howard Taft, who was president, elected in 1908, he wanted, that's all he wanted to be, was on the Supreme Court. He actually thought about doing that, or thought about some way if I could get the next president to appoint me. He would be appointed down the road. So, back to this. John Marshall. So this is going to be called the Marshall Court. The court is named after the Chief Justice. So we have the J Court, the Marshall Court. Today, who's the Chief Justice? Anyone know? His name is John Roberts. So it's the Roberts Court. He was appointed by George W. Bush. Okay, so with that, well, he's going to be on the Supreme Court for the next 35 years. The Federalist Party is going to be gone, and the Marshall Court will dominate. And he will radically change the court, expanding the power of the Supreme Court to where today the Supreme Court and the court system has immense power that was never in the Constitution. Never. The martial court is going to be called what we call nationalist at the time. And nationalist means pro-federal government. Remember, there's a federal system. Separate powers, state, then federal. He's a nationalist. And a court case came up in 1803 called Marbury versus Madison. Now the thing was, Supreme Court judges were actually circuit riders. They would ride from court to court and make rulings on appellate courts, courts of appeals. They didn't do what they do today. They were just the highest court of appeals, where if a case can move up to the next level, they might take it and hear another case. Marshall hated it, by the way. He hated riding around. He just wanted to stay in one place. His plantation was near Washington, D.C., and that's where he wanted to stay. So part of it was self-interest. This court case was basically this. I'm going to just give you the basic elements. Marbury, he was appointed to one of those courtships. Back then, the Secretary of State would have to seat him. The Secretary of State under Jefferson, who went to the next Secretary of State, was James Madison. Remember Madison? And that's where you get Marbury versus Madison. Madison refused to seat him, and then the Republican Congress got rid of his court, his judgeship, which Congress can do. Congress has the power to create the court system. He sued, went to the Supreme Court under Marshall. And Marshall ruled. In the ruling, said, yeah, I guess technically Congress can do that, but Madison should have seated him. Don't worry about that so much. What he said is that the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review. They can check the constitutionality of laws if there's a court case. If there's a court case. This is not in the Constitution. They just did it. The Federalists did it. And why did they do this? Put this down. I didn't type it in. Put this down. To veto. The Supreme Court they're holding would veto Republican laws. So they can keep Republicans from passing laws. So this is a massive power grab by the Federalists to veto, to stop Republican policy. Now, when I say this, everybody just didn't go, well, I guess they have that power. It's going to be 70 years before people would accept this power. So this will be debated, but eventually it would become to be accepted. Republicans went nuts. Jefferson was furious. R's are Republicans. Republicans suggested impeaching Marshall. They wanted term limits, but that'd have to change the Constitution. They wanted to rotate judges. Some wanted to get rid of the Supreme Court. Some wanted to expand the number. By the way, the number of justices on the Supreme Court varied from 8 to 12, but there were 9 circuit courts. So in the 1840s, they settled on 9. And that's why we have 9 now. There's no sacred number why there's 9. It just happened to be. So there could be 9, or it could be like the court in Athens. I know you're thinking, what about Clisthenes' democracy? Who was thinking that? Most of you? Right? Clisthenes' democracy? And we could have 1,001 judges. Wouldn't that be cool? We could all be judged. Yeah.
So what would happen if there were an even amount of votes between the Supreme Court judges if it was 8 or 12?
So if there's a tie, which right now there's only 8 judges, because 1 judge has passed away. And if there's a tie, then it goes back to whatever the previous ruling was. Because court cases have to bounce their way up the court system. And so what happens is, if it gets to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals rules one way, the loser can apply to go up to the next court level. The court doesn't have to accept it, but they can apply. And if the court accepts this and it's 4-4, then it goes back to the previous one. And by the way, it looks like the Trump's appointee for the Supreme Court will be confirmed on next Monday. That's what it looks like. And so, backtrack a little bit further. Now we got to go back to 17 95. The Treaty of Greenville. The Treaty of Greenville was signed after one of the most important battles, probably the second most important battle between the United States and the various tribes trying to defend their land. The Battle of Fallen Timbers, up here in present-day Michigan. The United States Army, the brand new United States Army, won this battle and forced the Confederacy of Tribes trying to stop the expansion of the U.S. Here's a diorama or a painting that's at the battle site, to sign the Treaty of Greenville. And the Treaty of Greenville gave the United States the full claim. Now, there are a number of tribes who claim this land. The land claims are obviously very complex, but this area in kind of dark gray, and in a couple other spots, that would go to the United States. The rest of this area here would go to the various tribes forever. Forever. Anybody want to guess how long forever lasts?
5 years.
Until we genocided them.
About 1 to 2 minutes. Until the United States was already violating that treaty. But also this land is now open, so the U.S. government can sell it. And remember, Jefferson wants a country of small farmers. And so the decision was, we got to start selling this land. Now, well, there's got to be a state government, doesn't there? There has to be a government in place. And thus we have Jefferson's land policy to try to open up this land. And there are 2 laws. Number 1, the Enabling Act of 1803. Be very careful if you look up the Enabling Act. Sometimes with a mask, it's hard to talk. This also is the act that would give Hitler, not this very act, but the Enabling Act of 1934 would give Hitler the power of a dictator in Nazi Germany. Good story, huh? So if you say, I'm going to look up the Enabling Act and come up with Hitler and think, this is like American history, God. So it would allow for a new state created from whole cloth called Ohio. And then they would, the money from the sale of public land, money for education from the sale of public land. Now, public education was not a public education where everybody has access, it's more complex, but the idea that this new state would provide money for education. And it opened up this land to create a new state. 2 things. First off, who's this guy?
Johnny Appleseed.
Johnny Appleseed, a real man.
He was from Ohio.
He wasn't from Ohio, it's from Pennsylvania, but he was a Republican. And he believed in the Jefferson philosophy of small farmers. And when I remember that, you probably heard that story in elementary school, right? I don't know, I thought it was just a myth. If you haven't heard that story, you haven't heard Johnny Appleseed?
I mean, I think we saw a little cartoon or something, but.
Let me find the cartoon. Yeah, he went around planting apple trees. He really did. His thought was, if small farmers are going to move in, they need a crop they can sell right away. Thus, apples. And what's the value of apples? It's not selling the apples, it's selling the what? Selling what?
The cut things.
The cut thingies. Yes, the cut thingies, which is one of my favorite parts of the apple.
So like the sap.
Cider.
Oh.
And hard cider. You know, hard apple cider. Remember, whiskey was a big, that's something that farmers could sell right away. Huh?
Everyone was Asian drunk,
Well,
especially back then.
Well,
Let's be clear about it. They drank a lot more, but they didn't, it wasn't like the binge that would come about.
Okay.
It was, I'm not saying it's healthy or good,
No.
but they did drink differently, habits were
fair
different.
alcohol is healthy.
The other thing was, it never really set up in the law that Ohio become a state, but it never actually said Ohio's a state. And technically, Ohio would not be a state for 170 years. And what do we have, 9 presidents from Ohio, and it wasn't a state yet?
And lots of.
Ohio was state.
Huh?
Yeah.
In the 1970s, a law was passed that say, we always meant Ohio to be a state. It's pretty funny. So, we've been to Ohio. See, that's why this is Ohio Day. I've been to Ohio. My nephew goes to Ohio State. Good story, huh?
Yeah. Oh, I have a riddle. What is round on both sides and has high in the middle? Ohio.
I know. I was hoping maybe you wouldn't finish. Ohio, yes. Columbus. Yeah. Columbus is like 2 million people. Yeah. I always think of Ohio and I think the two largest cities have got to be Cleveland and Cincinnati. It's Columbus. So, the next thing, the Land Act of 1804 reduced the size of land sales. Remember that Land Act of 1785 or 1787? Northwest Ordinance set up sections 1 by 1 mile. This allowed a quarter of a section, 160 acres, to be sold. Quarter section, small farms. And everyone thought 160 acres is the ideal size for a small farm. So in 1862, well, don't not write this down, but just in 1862, when Congress would pass the Homestead Act, it gave quarter sections to people. As it turned out, 160 acres is way too small in areas that it doesn't. Let me give you an example where it doesn't rain, like Montana. That would be a disaster. But in Ohio, you might have a shot for a while because it rains there. So the whole plan was to open up this land. Now, this place is relatively isolated. And so we're going to jump ahead to, let's go to Barbarian Pirates first. While that's going on, the Barbary Wars. Now the Barbary Pirates, this is the area of little quasi-independent states that are technically part of the Ottoman Empire here. And they made a lot of their money from pirating, which should be a verb if it's not. And not only capturing ships and taking the plunder, but enslaving people. This was a very profitable slave trade. Now, the slave trade from here, that went to the Americans. The slave trade from here, most of that went to here. Baghdad, Persia, which is Iran. So these states have been demanding a bribe. Say, if you give us a bribe, we won't stop ships from your country. That often. Jefferson refused to pay. Washington and Adams paid. Because like, what are we going to do? And so Jefferson decided, okay, we will send a few ships of our tiny little navy that was made in the 1790s. And what person opposed building that navy? Jefferson. And then Jefferson sends that navy, just a few ships, to go attack the main base for the pirates. Mouse, where'd you go, Mouse? Tripoli, which is now the capital of Libya, which is in the middle of a horrible civil war, still, pretty much your whole life. But this is often referred to as the Tripoli War. It says 1801 to 1805, but in reality, it was just 1803. And on board these ships are naval infantry. The United States calls them Marines. They would be on the mast, and they would take pot shots at enemy ships or board enemy ships. The Marines are part of the Navy still. And if you want to have fun, go to somebody in the Marines and tell them they're part of the Navy. You have a good time. They really appreciate that. And when you recover and complain, tell them Mr. Larson sent you, right? Yeah, we understand that, right? Right? Okay. Okay. So, this was an undeclared war. And remember the Alien and Sedition Acts, they said, no, or the Alien and Sedition Acts came about because of Republican criticism of the quasi-war against France, and now Jefferson's doing it. By the way, they would take Tripoli. It's really kind of an amazing story, but they couldn't stay. And as soon as they left, the pirating began again, and we ended up paying them. But this shows how Jefferson was pragmatic. While this is going on, Jefferson is really focused though on land in the West. The federal government would eventually give money for a federal road called the Cumberland Road or the National Road. And it would start construction in 1811. And I'll get to this federalism in a question mark in just a second. This is from the Park Service brochure. Most of the road now is a national park. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I know what you're thinking. It's a road. How could it be cool? It really is. But it went from just before the Cumberland Gap over the Appalachian Mountains to Vandalia, eventually to St. Louis. And these are all federal territories. These are all federal territories. So they started, the money was appropriated in building before Ohio became a state. And these were all federal territories. But it's going to be unclear for a very long time, can the federal government build this in states? Remember federalism, separate national and state governments. So of course the federal government can do this on federal territories like Illinois territory, but can they do it in states? This is going to be bitterly argued for the next 150 years. Today they've kind of settled it. Look at all the roads around Montana. 95% of the money for the roads comes from the federal government. And yes, they build them on purpose that they'll have to be repaired every 2 years. That's on purpose.
And then they don't.
Huh?
Then they don't.
Yeah, and then they wait 5 years to do it. Yeah.
One of the places that I lived out in Ohio,
Yeah.
and we had like a ton of potholes on the way to my house. Yeah, and there was a ton of potholes, and they didn't fix them for like 2 years. And then they finally fixed them, but then they didn't like flatten out or anything. So now what they did was turn it from potholes to speed bumps, small little speed bumps. So every time you're driving down the road, it's just like that.
So that could be a county road. Is that a county or federal? What road is it? Yeah, so there might be a different funding scope, but I believe it, yeah. And by the way, how do you get a ton of potholes? Isn't it a hole? How do you weigh a hole? Did I just blow your mind? Think about it for a sec, right? Can you weigh a hole?
2,000 tons of
Oh, okay, so.
atmosphere pressure.
No, I know exactly what you. So, by the way, if you get a chance, the road is still there. And up until the 1970s, they were using the national road that they constructed starting in 1811 for cars. They were still using it up through the 1970s. And it's a process called macadamization. And I'm just going to show you this because it shows you why there are going to be many roads. They're really well built. It's from a guy named Macadam. He was a Scotsman. And they would grade the road, and they would put drainage on both sides so it has a slight crown. And they would dig, so you go like dirt, sand, dirt, flatten it, and then put crushed rock that they have to crush by hand, and then they roll it. And that road lasts for years, hundreds of years. It's about 30 or about 60% of a regular 2-lane highway, the width, and it's all there. And there are parts of it that are just it's just a little road, but there are parts that have some of the old taverns, which are don't think in terms of a bar, think of a place you could eat and spend the night, and it's really cool. But you also see why there weren't going to be many roads until the 20th century. Think how long it's going to take to build that. It takes forever. There they are crushing the rocks by hand. That's how I got through college, making the national road. It was tough, but I did it for you. So with that, here's a map of the United States. This is population density. And you notice where the vast majority of the people of the U.S. are, here. Slight little group here. No citizens of the U.S. lived here. And Jefferson's biggest fear was not just expanding here, it was keeping this in the Union. There was a fear that this would break away from his own country, which seems so weird to think about today. So while that's going on, he needs a route to get commerce, trade, from here to here. It was faster to carry goods. It was faster to go from Cincinnati to New York this way in 1800. What city does he wanna buy?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. What are we coming to? The Louisiana Purchase. So, there's one thing you have to go watch from my class. So go to my webpage and YouTube video online. Yesterday's however, so I went over some Jeffersonian Era. And then
It must be this week.
next thing.
How do you like to say?
I say both. It really does. It completely does. What do you say?
Yeah, same, both. It's just how I feel.
So for each chapter, I give a little list of these, so much in the chapter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I try to narrow down things you need to know, and then I give a little quiz. And so yesterday I did a quiz, I jumped ahead just because I want to get a cover when I get to the revolution. But chapter a little more. And so what I'm gonna want you to do is over the next week or so, read chapter 12. And then take that quiz. But then, this is the one where I got that. You are.
Good job.
You have to start reading chapter 7.
Okay.
And these are the terms, just know the basics of them. Sometimes I'll talk about it in class, but just so you have a good idea about it. These are what we need to know from each other. Sound good?
Yeah.
And other than that, I don't have a lot to do right now.
Okay.
But please watch those notes. Yeah.
I was just gonna say a joke. There was something wrong with my grade. It was actually somewhat okay this time.
What'd
I
you
felt
get?
like it's a 9 out of 25 because of the ID. It doesn't show the points. for that.
Oh, okay, so I'll get the
Right.
idea graded.
Right, but I think I got number 1 wrong. But I mean, that was the only one I got.
That's
wrong.
awesome.
But,
Congratulate.
yeah, I just need to get the couple of notes, and then I think it was this last Wednesday, and then the Wednesday before that, and then I'm fully catched up on. or
Sounds
caught
good.
up. Catched up.
Catched up. Good work. And then once you get caught up and get over that, I'm not kidding, everything just becomes easy.
Right. Yeah.
I know one day it's gonna happen.
Oh, dude, I found this one